welcome to another episode of Chevrons, the podcast for the enlisted force. I'll be one of your hosts, Chief Master Sgt. Sean Sullivan.
And I will be your second co-host. Good morning, Chief. How you doing? This is Tech Sergeant Jay Whitaker, 102nd Intelligence Wing, Public Affairs, just holding the fort down. How you doing this morning, Chief?
I'm doing good, and we have a great guest today in our effort to always try to find new and unique Air Force leaders and Air Force opportunities. I have reached out to Chief Master Sergeant Chuck Powers. He is the National Guard Bureau Legislative Liaison. So his position is up on Capitol Hill, doing all kinds of wonderful and exciting things. He's had a diverse and excellent career. And without any further ado, I would like to welcome Chief Master Sergeant Powers. Chief Powers, how are you today?
Hey, Chief Sullivan. Good morning. How are you? I am doing well. Thank you for inviting me onto this podcast. I've been following Chevrons probably for a few months since I heard of it. Probably the last time we interacted and I heard that you were doing a podcast. And I think it's amazing providing this opportunity to airmen at all levels to hear some of the leaders that you've had on here, and one, to learn their experiences and understand just other airmen's stories and on how they've gotten to where they've gotten to. I think that teaches us a lot, and I appreciate all the insight that this podcast has provided. So thank you again for having me on, and welcome Tech Sergeant Whitaker as well. I appreciate your time as well.
Thanks, Chief.
And Chief Powers, thank you for that. And that's the essence of what we're trying to do here. And one of the things I noticed as I rose through the ranks is I was probably a senior master sergeant or a chief before I knew everything that was out there. As a matter of fact, I'll be 100% honest with you. I really didn't understand what the National Guard Bureau Legislative Liaison did, or even that we had one, probably until about 3 years ago. And I think that it is such a big position that you have. There's just so much that goes on, and there's so much that we're trying to do for the Air Force and for our enlisted force that you're almost directly involved with and touching on a daily basis. I thought it was important for you to get on and to let the airmen know what your office is all about and what you do there. But before we go into what you do, I want to know a little bit about you. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. I started out active duty Air Force, and I did that for just about 5 years. And from there, I went on to the Guard, the New York Air National Guard, at the 109th in Schenectady, New York. I was actually kind of found the Guard accidentally. I went from active duty and I was on terminal leave, and one of my buddies was a recruiter at the 109th in New York and asked me to just come talk to the CE commander, because I grew up in a CE career field. So I'm like, okay, I'll go talk. I don't know if I want to go back in. I do miss it, and I talked to the CE commander, the CE chief, and well, they sold me. I was in, and next thing I knew, I was back in the military, and it was great. Loving it ever since. I have no regrets there, So I was at New York for about 6 years. And while I was in Afghanistan, I applied for an NGB stat tour to manage civil engineer deployments. And I did that for a few years. And then the stat tour program grabbed me and said, hey, we're going to develop you into an A8 position doing strategic planning and the PALM process. And I said, I don't know what that is. I don't know if I want to do that. And, I had some good mentors say, no, you want to do this. I was the only enlisted in A8, help manage the PALM process. And that was a really great experience, an eye-opening experience, seeing how the Air Force manages the PALM process. And then from there, I came back to A4, A7, as a branch chief for deployments for training and all deployments and training like stuff for civil engineers. From that position, I went and I was the DANG superintendent when Lieutenant General Rice was the DANG. So I did that for about a year and a half, which another eye-opening experience and totally outside my comfort zone. And then I decided at that point, I was a senior master sergeant. I needed to go back to the field. I found a position and was hired as the civil engineer, senior enlisted leader at the 140th in Colorado, Buckley Space Force Base now. I was a squadron chief for just about a year, and then the state grabbed me and asked me to compete for the maintenance group superintendent position. So I went over again, seeing another side of the Air Force, seeing how, the support function works as a CE chief, going to being a maintenance group chief in a fighter wing was a really interesting experience that really challenged me in many ways, and also added more things to my leadership toolbox, which was amazing. And then from there, I competed for the legislative liaison position, and here I am today as the sole air enlisted member on the legislative liaison team. Representing CNGB, the vice chief, SEA Whitehead, Chief Williams. So that's a pretty humbling and amazing experience so far as well. So that's me and my military career in a nutshell, Chief.
Well, I didn't think that there was anybody out there that would have had as eclectic a path through the military as I did. But now talking to you, so active duty, 109th, 109th's the ski birds with the Arctic mission, correct?
Yes, that is correct. I was able to experience Antarctica for about 2 months as well on a deployment up there, which was amazing. Say down there.
That is fantastic. And then just showing what something like an NGB stat tour can do for somebody's career. And we get these things done all the time. And that's one of the things that was really, I never really understood that as a tech sergeant or as a master sergeant. We would get these, NGB stat tours. And you're like, okay, cool. NGB stat tour. I don't know what that is. I'm just going to move on. And I think one of the reasons that it doesn't resonate in a lot of wings is because people don't understand what the stat tour is or what the process is or what you can get out of it, even if you don't want to use it as a vehicle to, like in your situation, it became a vehicle for you to stay within the NGB system, leave and come back. But for a lot of people, that might not be the case. So can you cover that from your perspective, exactly what the stat tour was and what you got out of it, even if it was just to do a tour and go back to your unit?
Absolutely. I think the stat tour program, first and foremost, is a great developmental opportunity for any airman to go up and get that breadth of knowledge at the headquarters level. And we have that, we call it the stat tour program. And what that is Title 10 positions at NGB. It could be at the Air Readiness Center, the Army Readiness Center. We have joint staff there, and it can also be at the Pentagon. And then there's also several positions within the TEC, is another example, which is in Tennessee, or the Air Readiness Center, Air Personnel Readiness Center in Colorado, more stat tour positions there as well. But what those positions do for an airman is provide them a 30, 40,000 foot view of the programs in the Air Force, in the Air National Guard, at the National Guard Bureau level, that gets them that knowledge that they can't necessarily get in the field. And then there's a lot of different opportunities, like you heard from my path. I had no clue. One, I didn't even know what an A staff was. I didn't know what A1, A2, A3. I didn't know that we even had those or what that meant. So just to understand an headquarters structure, because the NGB has the A staff, well, then you also learn is how the entire DoD is structured in those type of in that construct. And to take that kind of information and bring it back to the field, your organization, rather you go to a squadron group or the wing level, is going to be so much better off because you understand that higher level. So when you're working through manpower issues, resourcing issues, deployment mobilization process issues, you're going to know who to contact at that headquarters level to get something fixed. So it empowers the airmen that do go back to the field to educate every level at the wing, especially members that don't come up to an headquarters level. So it definitely does a lot. I think it's also important to note that it is easy to want to stay at the headquarters level once you get here, but it is so important to try and bring that knowledge back to the field, as well as to continue your career broadening. You can be an expert, at the within the Stat Tour program or at the headquarters level, but what you lose, and I figured this out as well, and it took me to get back to the field to realize it, is it's not that you lose the field perspective, it's that you are holding on to the field perspective that you had when you left the field to come up to the Stat Tour program. So that field perspective that I had in 2011 when I left New York to come up to the Stat Tour program is not the same 2, 3, 4 years later. That field perspective has changed because, as we all know, every process, every program that we have in the military changes constantly. And when any change comes to a regulation or to a program, it affects that airman, that soldier down at the field level. And if you're staying at headquarters and you're not down there to embrace those changes, you don't understand the struggle that the field is having. So that's why I think it's also important to go back and get a fresh perspective of the field as well.
I couldn't agree with you more. And the importance of these NGB staff tours is just fantastic for emerging leaders. And one of the points that I like to make on that is I was talking to one of your fellow New York Air National Guard airmen just recently who had done a stat tour. They had gone on a stat tour for 2 years and returned back to the field. Was a tech sergeant or master sergeant? Tech sergeant. And I asked, well, what was your driving motivation? He said, well, I had a conversation with our state command chief, and I believe that it was Chief Richardson, who we've had on here at the time. I believe that was the command chief, or could have been the command chief before him. I'm not sure. But said I told the command chief that they asked what I did, and I said, well, I'm just a. And command chief stopped me and said, what do you mean you're just a? Well, I just do this for the Air National Guard, and I don't feel like I have any value. And they encouraged this airman to apply to a stat tour because they thought that if you could get to that 40,000 foot view, if you can get beyond the tactical and even beyond the operational level of what your wing does, and you look at the entire strategic picture, and then you look down and go through all the little wickets and say, geez, it doesn't matter what I do. If I was not needed, but if that position was not necessary, needed, and important for the current and the future fights ahead, it wouldn't be there. So it doesn't matter what you do as a professional warrior. All these positions are important, and they came back and they had a renewed sense of importance over what their AFSC and mission set was, and now they were rising through the ranks and through the positions in that mission set and motivating all the other airmen that had that same AFSC to understand we are important. We might not be the person flying the plane, or we might not be the door kicker in some operation in some country, kicking the door down and tossing a frag in. But if you weren't important and vital, you wouldn't be there. And I think popping up and seeing that and then bringing it back down to the tactical level, so much for your development and so much tie-in with the airmen around you. So I am a firm believer in both NGB and Joint Force Headquarters stat tours, because I think that it really invigorates you as an airman in your career, but it helps you bring back that knowledge of how important every single one of us wearing this uniform is. And if you weren't needed and you weren't a professional warrior, you wouldn't be here.
Absolutely, Chief. And really what that gets to is, making sure airmen understand the why, and being able to explain at that 30, 40,000 foot level of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and why every single position at your wing is important, is I would say, it is definitely needed in order to help inspire and motivate them airmen to do well. They need to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I always like to do is when things come up and we have these our interviews and we're recording our chevrons, some process will come up that we as senior leaders are firmly aware of and we understand, but we have a lot of junior airmen that are going to go, all right, well, the chief said he was part of a POM. What the heck was that? So, Chief, could you just, in a nutshell, explain what the process is, what the acronym stands for, and what the process is, so that our audience that's out there that doesn't comprehend what that is or have not experienced it yet, have that awareness.
Thank you, Chief Powers.
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah, I said POM process, right? Yeah, what does that mean to, A1C Smith down in the field, right? So POM, it's Program Objective Memorandum, but really what that means is DoD has a process they are always planning a 5-year, what we call a FIDEP. That is a 5-year plan of how the DoD is going to, what kind of funds they need to operate based on the National Defense Strategy and the National Military Strategy. How do we support these two strategies? Well, there's a huge, every department has an 8. For example, we have an A8. And their sole job is to continue to what we like to call the engine shop. They are constantly churning all these different plans and strategies to figure out what it's going to cost to run the Air National Guard for the next 5 years with all the missions that it has operationally, and how it fits into the bigger picture. And that POM process for the Air National Guard ties into the Air Force's POM process, because at the end of the day, the Air Force and the Air National Guard, they obviously support each other, right? So in any given year, you're submitting every year what the Air National Guard needs for the following 5 years. And that's really, very high level of what the POM process is. There's a lot that goes into it. There's an example would be, hey, the Air Force needs to pay a bill, meaning we are getting new F-35s and we need to buy 45 of them. I'm just making made up numbers right now. We need to buy 45 of them in FY24, fiscal year 24. Air National Guard, we need you to, for 45 of them, it's going to be $300 billion. I'm just making a number up. Air National Guard, we need you to pay $100 billion. Air Force Reserve, we need you to, pay another $100 billion. How are we going to do that? The director of the Air National Guard, along with AA, is going to say, okay, we can cut this, this, and this. That means we have to divest this wing and that wing in order to help pay this bill. And that's just a piece of how the POM process works. Again, it takes a long time, and it's a 5-year process really. But that's just a simplified version of that. In a nutshell, it's the bean counters as well as what we like to call the engine shop, the airmen working in A8, really trying to come up with all these different plans and figure out how the Air National Guard is resourced as a whole.
And one of the things you just touched upon there is one of the most important takeaways on the process. And I get this from airmen of all ranks frequently. And that is, why can't we have more X? Or why can't we have more of this rank? Or why can't we have more of these days? Or why can't we have more of this equipment? And the answer is that you can, but, and it all involves that process and trying to figure out what are you going to lose in order to gain. Because every time you get these 5-year plans and you're looking at 5 years out and you say, okay, 5 years out, we're going to have this. Well, it's constant OJT, to quote a great leader from my past. The whole thing is constant OJT. By the time you get to year 4, things had to get shifted and moved around. Doesn't mean you're going to get any more money, because you're unlikely to be able to plan on having, $100 billion more. You have to plan based on what you got. And when you only have that limited pool, you have to prioritize. And it would be nice if we could make everything a priority one, but that's kind of, for the airmen that are listening to, that's kind of why a lot of times we don't get everything that we want, because there has to be a give and take based on need, necessity. And as you said, the engine room and the bean counters got to get together and prioritize based on the combatant commanders and what they need, relevance. And there's just so much to it. And just Chief Powers, for you having been involved in that for so long, God bless you, because I just gave myself a popsicle headache in 2 minutes of trying to break it down in my own head.
Yes, it's
Same.
I still don't understand it all, but it's a never-ending game. So,
Chief Whitaker, what are you thinking for question?
Well, as far as just legislative liaison, I mean, what is your day? How do you take care of yourself during the daytime? I mean, you've just dropped a lot of knowledge on us in a short amount of time, and I'm like Chief Sullivan right now. I'm getting the popsicle headache, so I can't imagine what your day is like, and just what time you start, when do you end, how do you take care of yourself, Chief?
hey, that's a great question, and it's obviously the work-life balance, right? Even though it's hard to say a work-life balance sometimes, because at times you have to prioritize work, but there's always yourself. If you're not taking care of yourself, you can't give 100% to your job. So it's the work-life balance of trying to figure that out, and that's a lot of planning and organization, I would say, is how I try to take care of myself. Look on what my week looks like, look at what my day looks like, and plan outwards. I'm always trying to look ahead. But your question, Sergeant Whitaker, with NLL, I know I dropped a lot of information on that PALM process, and but really, what my day looks like in the in the day of Chuck Powers being at LL. There's a lot that goes into it, but I think it's important to kind of explain, what is this position and what does it do? Is that okay if I kind of explain that first, and then we can talk about what my day looks like?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, as a legislative liaison, what I do and what all the other legislative liaisons do, our number one priority is we serve as the conduit of communication between Congress and all Congress's agencies or sub offices that they have, and the National Guard Bureau. We represent the Chief of the National Guard Bureau on all, excuse me, all legislative actions. We're constantly informing and educating Congress on the National Guard's plans, programs, budget policies, activities, and any kind of issues out there. So as you see, if something gets posted on Twitter one day, I guarantee you, if it was negative towards the Department of Defense, there's a congressperson reaching out to the Department of Defense saying, what is going on here, and what is this? Please explain. And if it's something that involves the National Guard, we will be up in the chief's office explaining how he needs to communicate back to Congress of what this was, and how we're either taking care of this airman or soldier or whatever the specific post was about. So that's a small example of that. So we're constantly advising the Chief of the National Guard Bureau and all the other senior leaders, the Joint Staff Directors that represent the Joint Staff, and the Air Staff and the Army Staff, all those GOs. We're advising them on the congressional activities that are going on any given day. Which is important right now as we're watching the NDAA 2023 go on. As we speak, the Senate is meeting on the NDAA, and that's DoD's bread and butter right there. That is what we know, what programs are going to be supported or not supported or funded through that process, and we manage basically all the entire legislative program falls on this office, and that includes, the planning for the out years. The chief testifies twice a year, the mandated testimonies that he has to give Congress on the appropriation committees, and then any other hearings that come up. We are constantly prepping him for those, and then the legislative proposal process, and then responding to any formal congressional correspondence is what we're doing. Another thing that we do as a liaison, really our job is, as liaisons, we have to network with the congressional staff. The staff members, there's personal staff members and there's professional staff members. And we have to have a working relationship with them constantly. So, when the chief needs to meet with, Senator Peters, let's say, we know those staff members and we talk to them prior to understand what the senator's priorities are, what he is looking for out of the chief, and also to prep the chief on, hey, these are your current priorities, and this is what the senator's objectives are in communicating with you. So we constantly do engagements like that with Congress as well. It's also important to note what we can't do. We cannot lobby. We are not obviously in the business by law. We can't just go and lobby for specific programs that are outside the current administration's priorities. So we inform and educate Congress on the National Guard. We inform them of any needs that we have based on the priorities of the president and based on the national defense strategy. And then obviously the chief has a responsibility to Congress to give his best military advice to support the overall mission. So that's really what LL does. And in a day of LL, I could be I've really bounced back between a few places of work. So we have an office in the Senate side of the Capitol, and we have an office on the House side. I am there when we have engagements with either SEA Whitehead, Chief Williams, the Vice Chief, the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, and the Director of the Air National Guard. So any engagement with those members, I am likely involved in some way. And we are with them when they meet with those members of staff or with Congress. So I bounce between the Hill and I bounce between. I also have an office at the Pentagon here. That's where I'm sitting today. So it's a shuffling game. I could be anywhere, any given day, depending on the day and depending on what's going on in Congress.
Wow. Well, thank you, Chief Powers. I appreciate that. Sounds like you're getting your steps in a lot. So that as far as your, and like you mentioned your day to day, but when was the day that it all just kind of clicked for you to say, I just want to go work at the Pentagon?
Oh, I don't think that day ever really clicked. No, I think I got to my first position at the Pentagon was when the Director of the Air National Guard's office reached out to my supervisor at the time when I was in a senior position, and they wanted me to. They were interested to talk to me about being the superintendent for General Rice. And I'm like, oh, do I want to go work at the Pentagon? I do live about probably 2 miles from the Pentagon, so I guess that's the convenience there.
Wow.
Metroing rather than driving, so that was a plus. But my ambitions were always, I was really focusing on whatever position I was in at the time. And at that time, I was at Andrews Air Force Base, serving as a branch chief within the A4 division for civil engineering. And, I wanted to do the best I could, but I wanted to also continue to grow my leadership skills and climb that ladder. I wanted to make an impact where I can make an impact based on the experiences I've had. So if it meant a position at the Pentagon, I was all for it. But really, honestly, as a master, as a senior, I never seen myself in the Pentagon positions, especially as a legislative liaison. I've seen this position before and I'm like, wow, that's a pretty cool position, but I don't think I could ever do that. I don't know if I have what it takes to do that. And now I'm here. And it's the cause of talent management and force development and really good mentors that continue to push me outside my comfort zone to get where I am today.
Thank you, Chief Powers, for answering that question and just for taking that question, because in my mind I'm thinking, you just wake up and you're like, all right, I think I'm going to go work at the Pentagon. But as far as starting out as a young airman, what what were the things that you prioritized most about your career and as far as your work-life balance?
Yeah, great question. So, starting out as a young airman, um, especially my first 5 years or so, I was, let's see, I was stationed in Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Wow.
And yeah, so interesting location, right? But it was great. It was great. Uh, many, let's see, I was on 3 different deployments in Grand Forks. I joined in December of 2000. So, after September 11th hit, that is when things got very busy, especially for the CE community. So it was kind of, I was trying to find my way as a young airman. So it was difficult to really understand what a work-life balance was, because when I joined the Air Force, it was after September 11th happened, it was all about being ready and getting ready to deploy. And guess what happened when you deployed? You deployed, and that was a constant. That was just constant. You were just totally focused on your deployment at the time. You came back from deployment, they gave you probably a week or two off, and you were getting ready for your next deployment. So the first few years, I didn't, I don't, I didn't know until after the fact, until I got to New York, looking back, I didn't really have that work-life balance. I didn't give myself the time I needed to really find myself and who I was. That took some time, and I had some really good mentors in New York, some pretty good leaders that made me realize, hey, yeah, you're great at what you're doing, but what are you doing for yourself? And what are you doing to take care of yourself? Where is that work-life balance? And that's the first time I really heard that. I remember a chief at the time. We were coming back from our second deployment, or actually my first deployment with the New York Guard, and he says, "What are you doing for yourself? You have been nonstop," and he made me realize that. And so that work-life balance didn't start and probably until about my 8th year in the military. And what I really started doing is one, I started with, hey, I'm gonna have this regimented schedule of I'm not staying late unless obviously the mission needs me to stay late. I'm gonna have a gym schedule, and I'm going back to school. I need to really develop my educational skills a little bit more as well. And that's how I started doing that, and really separating work life and personal life, because that chief always told me, he says, hey, this job is going to be here tomorrow.
Mm.
What are you doing, and then what are you doing 20 years from now? What you do now could dictate some of those things that you do 20 years from now. And I am so glad he had that conversation with me.
Chief Powers, what would you say to any airman that is looking to pivot, or just in that kind of I won't just that doldrums phase where you may just be like, well, how do you get out of that rut? Because it seems like from what I'm hearing, and maybe I could be interpreting wrong, but it seems like you like a switch went on, and you were just like, all right, it's time to get serious. Take my professional development serious. How do you pivot?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I would tell any airman, and I've seen this, being at the squadron and the group level as SEL, sitting down with airmen, is, look at what you're doing, look at the time that you're spending in your professional career, um, and look at what you're putting in, and make sure you are putting the equal amount or more into your personal life and your family. That is the most important. If the other side of your life outside of work is not healthy, and you're having those issues, it's going to be very difficult to retain you as an airman, because your family may be blaming the service for this imbalance that you have, and that's not healthy. And the best way to do that is have these conversations. Have these conversations with airmen early in their careers to understand it's okay to have to put your personal life before work sometimes. Obviously you hear that, mission first, and that is true when we need to put the mission first. But it is also reality that we need to take care of our people. That's our number one priority. And in order to do that, we need to make sure they feel like they can be put first.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you. Well said.
That's one thing I always like to interject on is, like you said, mission first. Yes, we do have to put the mission first, but I think commanders and senior enlisted have a strong understanding that the people are a big part of the mission too. And there's a conversation that I had not too long ago with a young airman where they were talking about, well, service before self, service, service, service. And I had to break it down in my perspective. This is the Chief Sully perspective, not a written down anywhere perspective. But my perspective on that, I think that the original authors of that were talking about selfish pursuits that take away from your service, meaning showing up late for work because you decided to play Xbox and not requesting some time off to take a family member to an appointment, or calling in sick and faking an injury because you want to binge watch Game of Thrones, as opposed to taking a day because you had the conversation with your leadership that you just need a mental health day because you're dealing with some stuff. And I think that's where we get lost in it. Sometimes people just feel it's engage, mission first, service before self. Capital W, capital E, we, the airmen, are the mission. So as leaders and as airmen, sometimes you need to turn around and say, I have this going on, I need to take a knee. The mission's still going to get done, but you're part of that mission too. So leaders and airmen never feel that that it's all go, 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 go. It is, in my opinion, talking about that selfish aspect, that me stuff, not, all right, I have this going on, it's going to impact my life, I need to take a knee, as opposed to, I just feel like staying home today and eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and watching, 2.5 Men. It's not this selfish, but sometimes we need to take care of ourselves. So I just wanted to interject my philosophy on that. Chief, I have a question for you.
Yes.
What are you guys working on now? I mean, what's big on the Hill? What are we trying to do for our Air National Guardsmen and for the Air National Guard in general that's getting worked up there? And what's it looking like? I know that's a pretty big question because you're probably working on 500 things right now, and we're trying to accomplish a lot. But what are 2 or 3 big things that are rounding the corner that are looking good, they're going to benefit our Guardsmen?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's, like you said, obviously we're working on a lot of different things, and I could probably talk all day on the legislative process. But what we're currently working on is, Congress is still in session. Congress has one more week in session right now. So we are 100% focused on making sure we're providing Congress everything they need, because what they're doing right now is building the National Defense Authorization Act 2023, NDAA 2023. And when they need our input, we need to give it to them, and also provide them, our views of some of the language that they're thinking about putting in there. So they are constantly reaching out to us and saying, hey, we're looking at putting this language into the NDAA. How would that impact the Guard? Because I think the Guard has a strategic advantage of the relationships that we have with Congress, because every decision that Congress makes for the military, it impacts the Guard, but those congressmen and women are making decisions that also affect their constituents, because most senators and Congress members have a Guard base or unit within their district or within their state. So it also affects, a win for them if they can provide us what they need. So currently right now we are responding to NDAA 2023 markups and amendments that they're looking at putting in there. And then we're also, escorting the GOs on the Hill with some really key engagements to educate the Appropriations Committee, because we talk about the NDAA a lot, but the NDAA provides us the authorizations for the military for programs, but it doesn't come with money. That's the appropriation bills that come with money. So there's a whole separate committee out there working on the appropriation bills to try to get us a budget. So we've been working on key engagements with the chief and also with the director of the Air National Guard. He was on the Hill until probably about 6 o'clock last night, engaging with senators on explaining why the Guard needs certain appropriations and certain funding in this upcoming 23 bill. So those are really the key things that we're working on right now. Also, to have a little bit of an outlook, the FY24 process, what we call the legislative proposal process, that is really what seeds the NDAA. And so FY24, I'm talking on, hey, FY23, Congress is working on that right now. Well, at the same time, we're working on the OSD, the Office of Secretary of Defense, and the Department of Defense process for what we're going to present to Congress for the FY24 NDAA, which are all due by August. So we're working on that as well. The chief's about to approve the legislative proposals that we're going to push to the Secretary of Defense, which the Secretary of Defense will then push to Congress and say, hey, this is the start of 24 NDAA, meaning, hey, this is what DOD wants. And Congress will look at that, and obviously they determine what will go in there and what doesn't. So those are a few of the items that we're working on right now. One more item that I will mention, and I have a meeting with SEA Whitehead tomorrow. He's the senior enlisted advisor to the chief. Looking at some engagements for him at Angus and Naugus to make sure he is able to provide the enlisted perspective to Congress on what programs we have and where the National Guard stands. I think it's really important that Congress hears that enlisted perspective, because when the chief or the director of their National Guard, they are representing obviously the National Guard and the Air National Guard and the Air Force, and they do it very, very well. But you can never replace the enlisted perspective, because the enlisted perspective really drills down to how anything and everything in that NDAA affects people and affects our airmen. And SEA Whitehead, he does that very well, and he's able to educate Congress on that. So those are really the main items that we're working on right now.
Basically, what you're trying to tell me is you have all kinds of free time, and you're one of those people that sits home all day watching Game of Thrones.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And don't forget the Xbox.
Yeah, yep, Xbox too. One thing I wanted to break down for our enlisted members that are listening is what the SCA is and what the hierarchy is, because I actually had this as a question from one of the wings I was visiting not too long ago, when they were like, yeah, I don't even understand all the senior enlisted relationships. So I just wanted to take one quick second to kind of like break it down for everybody. So as every airman knows, you have a command chief. Yeah. And then in the National Guard, every state has a state command chief. And that covers the air end, with the state command chief being the senior enlisted advisor to the TAG on air issues and to the air commander on air issues in the state. But you also have what's called a CSEL, which is a chief senior enlisted advisor to the TAG, which can be air or Army. So if you think of everything we do on the air side, there's a sergeant major on the Army side. And then when you look at being one National Guard, you have one person at the very top of the pyramid that will always be talking to the senior most leader, whether it is in the Guard state level or all the way up. And in the air side, that would be Command Chief Master Sergeant Williams, who we have had on this show, who is the Command Chief Master Sergeant of the Air National Guard, who works directly for the works directly at NGB for the commander of the Air National Guard. Then you have the commander of the National Guard. Now, I'm not using the right terms for commanders. I'm trying to not confuse everybody, but everybody has their own title level. So Chief Williams has a counterpart in the Army, Chief Rains, and then the senior enlisted advisor to the man at the top of the National Guard, General Hokanson, is SEA Whitehead. SEA is a rank and a position, and it's really, really cool if you ever get to meet SEA Whitehead, Senior Enlisted Advisor Whitehead. You'll see that he kind of has a chief's rank, but he's got this weird stuff around it. So it is as unique as having a rank Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, where Chief Bass has her own unique rank. And the unique rank and position is for either Air or Army. And it's a really, really cool thing. But we are so fortunate in the air side to have SEA Whitehead there, who is, he's a joint, I like to call him a joint leader. He has full understanding of Army and full understanding of air. But it's just really nice to see a former command chief now ascend to that SEA position. So I just wanted our listeners to understand that hierarchy when we start talking about these people. You as an enlisted person at every single level will have a senior enlisted representation in the form of a command chief, and at the very top, or a C-cell, because some of these C-cells are air. They're not all Army. In Massachusetts, it's Army. Hey, Sergeant Major Campbell. But you have this hierarchy all the way up, and all these senior enlisted leaders are doing nothing but ensuring that the highest level, the voice of the enlisted force, is always heard. And I do not know a general, whether it is brigadier all the way up to general, that does not listen to their senior enlisted advisors. So it's a good time to be a guardsman, because at no other time in history has the voice of the enlisted been so strong with Chief Powers, what he's doing on Capitol Hill, and all the way through. Our senior officers are listening to what we have to say as senior enlisted advisors. And our information and what we try to do comes from all of you. The A1Cs, the senior airmen, tech sergeants, masters, seniors, other chiefs. We work for you, and we advocate for you, and we try to strategically posture what we need to get done with our leaders, and we work synergistically together. And that's why we have the greatest military in the world. So I just wanted to point that out for our listeners so that they'd have a stronger understanding of how all these relationships work, and that they're always being represented all the way up the chain. Chief, I do have one more question for you, and this will be my final Jeopardy question of the day as we get to wrap things up. I've been a member of the National Guard for a long time. I spent a lot of time on active duty, but I first entered Guard service in 1987. And I know that I'm talking, how we are viewed at the Hill, how we are viewed from our congressmen or senators. What do they think of the National Guard? That view was different in 1987 than it was when I was deployed for the first Gulf War in 91. And it was different in 2001 and all the way through our last 20-year tumultuous history. But we've done a lot the last couple of years as a Guard. What is the prevailing thought on the Guard, the appreciation level? How are we seen as National Guardsmen by our congressmen, our senators right now in 2022?
Chief, this is a great question. So as of right now in 2022, and based on, the engagements that I have been able to be a part of with the director of the Air National Guard and the chief and the vice chief, Capitol Hill, the senators and the congressmen, the representatives, they have 100% fully supported the National Guard, and they want to continue to support the National Guard. And I say that, 100%. It really does. Every congressperson support the National Guard? Well, every interaction that I have, yes, they have. And the National Guard in the past 2 or 3 years has really amplified who they are and what we support to Congress, and Congress has realized that, and they've been in the spotlight. We have totally been in the spotlight with the COVID response to civil unrest, the Capitol Hill response. They really understand now, one, why we need the National Guard, why the National Guard needs to be properly resourced, and now they're trying to figure out how do we do this? How do we do this in the most fiscally smart ways to make sure the National Guard is supported? So I would say the Hill is very supportive of the Guard, and then also, to the point of, and where we have the advantage of every senator, every House of Representative, maybe not every House of Representative, but most of them have some kind of National Guard installation within their districts, and that is very important to them. So they are really looking at us on supporting us in every way possible and understanding how unique the National Guard is. One thing we have to remember is, Congress turns over, a third of Congress turns over every 2 years, and that's why it's really important to have our office for the chief to continue to educate and inform Congress on what the National Guard is, and understand some of the nuances, because as we all know, we have a lot of duty statuses and titles, and that can be very challenging to understand sometimes. So when some kind of law or language is put in the NDAA to allow additional maternity leave to active duty service members, we have to educate Congress on what that means to the National Guard and why the National Guard needs some kind of benefit equivalent to that, and how that can really work out. And again, that's just an example. And they support us, and they really do, and they are very receptive to the National Guard and the needs that we have.
Thank you for that. And that was my assumption, that at no other time in history have I seen more support from Congress and from the Senate and from the politicians in general, understanding what our capabilities are. But as you said, that's the caveat, understanding statuses and understanding all these. And we are not going to talk about that in this episode, because you want to talk about popsicle headache. Man, that goes beyond popsicle headache. That's iceberg headache.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes, for sure.
So, Whitaker, any closing questions?
Not really, Chief Powers. I just really appreciate the time and the energy and that you brought to this conversation. I mean, the big question I do have, you did mention a lot of your mentors as you were coming up. Is there one phrase or one comment or one piece of advice that you would that is like resonating in your head, that sticks with you every day from a mentor that you had? Would you mind sharing it with us if possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go back to the chief I had to New York. He says, you're not going to be an expert at everything you do, but try to be an expert at everything you do. And that really still resonates with me today. I get that. You can't, you can't know everything, but you do have, you do have to know where to get the information when you need it. But when you strive to be the best at everything that you do, reality is something's got to give sometimes. So don't kill yourself on trying to do something the best or everything at the best, but try to be that expert and understand what the next step is. And he really ingrained that into my thought processes. Hey, you're going to give me a job. I'm going to do everything I can to be an expert at that job. Yes, especially in the military, sometimes, we're in a position 2 years and it's just not possible to be that expert. But I know that I tried the best to do everything I could to be that expert.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Well, Chief Powers, thank you for your time today. I know you have a busy schedule every day. So I do appreciate you taking your time and getting us to understand exactly what your role is, what your path is. I think that you have provided a lot of good insights and a lot of good information for our enlisted. So I appreciate you. I know we're going to be seeing each other again soon in one of these conventions or one of these trainings, or we'll be seeing each other again soon. And when we do, I owe you a beverage of your choice. And I appreciate your time today.
All right, Chief, thank you. And thank you, Sergeant Whitaker, for your time. I really appreciate it. The thing that I really want to leave with to all you out there, all the airmen that are listening, is, every day is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to improve, to make an impact, and to be heard. And we need to continue to empower our airmen to do that. They can improve, they can make an impact, and we need to hear them, and we need to hear you. So I think that's really important to kind of understand. To be able to make an impact at the lowest level is really proving that we have empowered our airmen. And in order for them to do that, they need to be heard. So all the airmen out there, it doesn't matter what rank you are. If you have a good idea, if there's something that you see that we can do better, we need to hear that as in leadership. So I just wanted to thank you for your time. I really appreciate this. I really appreciate the time you've given me to, provide my perspective at this level, and really appreciate the Chevrons, and continue to listen and look forward to your other podcasts.
Thank you, Chief, for the mentorship advice. Thank you just so much for your time today.
As we wrap up this episode, there's one thing one thought that I wanted to bring to mind. And as we were talking, it popped into my head. And it's an old saying. It's like a leadership lesson. As Chief Whitaker had mentioned earlier, it's a leadership lesson you got from a mentor. Well, here's one that just seems to tie in everything. And that is, a diamond is nothing more than a piece of coal that transformed itself into its very best under pressure. And it made me think, as a leader, are you releasing the pressure or adding the right amount of pressure to assist your airmen to transform into their very best? And as airmen, are you looking for situations or scenarios or opportunities or different things that you can do that will increase the pressure a little bit and help you transform into a diamond? It doesn't have to be something as grandiose as going to Joint Force Headquarters on a stat tour or going to NGB on a stat tour, but just any little assignment, becoming an additional duty for a sergeant for one, or something out of your comfort zone that's going to increase a little bit of pressure and let you evolve and let you become your very best you. So think about that. Think about, as a leader, what can we do to put the right amount of pressure on our airmen? What opportunities can we provide them? What things can we do to take them out of their comfort zone? And what can you do for yourself? I want to thank the listeners for their listenership to our Chevrons podcast. Tim Sandlin, our producer. And I would like to thank Sergeant Whitaker, who is our latest addition to PA and new part of the team. In closing, if you have any ideas for Chevrons, any guests you'd like to hear, any topics you'd like to have us breached, find me on the global, Sean.Sullivan.17. Find me in the global, Sean.Sullivan.17. Hit me up with any questions, comments, or concerns, anything you'd like to hear. And thank you